Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the WEIM Resource Efficiency Evaluation Enhancements, Phase 2 for the revised final proposal. My name is Brenda Corona with the Stakeholder Affairs Group here at the California ISO, and I'll be helping facilitate this call today. And I'm also joined here by Danny Johnson, our Market Design Sector Manager and Market and Infrastructure Policy. He'll be helping taking this call for us today. But before we begin, I do want to go over a few meeting reminders as this call is being recorded for informational and conveniences purposes only. Any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. As well, if you do experience any technical issues during the call, please feel free to send a chat to my event producer and myself. As this instructions we're providing here today, if you're connected through audio from your computer, please use the call me function and use the raise hand icon above your chat window. If you're dialed in only through phone, please use #2 on your phone device so we can find that you're also having a question. Before you ask a question, make sure you state your name and affiliation. As well, when you're asking a question during chat, please also state your name and affiliation so we can know who's speaking. As a reminder, feel free to send them questions over to myself or to all panelists, and we will be able to kick things off for this call. For this agenda, we will have one line item from Danny Johnson for the Systems and Energy background and updates and proposal. And then at the end, I will go over the EIM classification and next steps. For today's stakeholder process, we're currently at the end of the final proposal. We're going towards a decision to ISO board, and then possibly Danny will go over most of this information, but our goal is that we are planning to implement on June 1st, 2023. As of now, we're going to go ahead and open up Danny's line to, we can see you, Danny, and also test audio for your next segment. Danny, oh, there you go.
All right, thank you, Brenda. Yeah, so before we jump in, I did see a question in the chat that popped up about the availability of this presentation. I think that we would look to make this presentation as well as a companion paper that fills out more detail than we'll be talking about today available shortly after this call. So ideally sometime kind of early this afternoon. So the reason we're here, and this is a little bit non-traditional, is we received a lot of feedback on the final proposal regarding the design of the Assistance Energy product. And we saw concerns raised from multiple different stakeholders for varying reasons. Some stakeholders opposed the proposed Assistance Energy design because it wasn't in market pricing signal and would have the potential to impact all real-time and balance energy. This concern was really rooted in an asymmetry with how the California ISO Balancing Authority area participates as compared to WEIM BAAs. The issue that was raised is the reference point for real-time energy imbalance would be the day-ahead market schedules versus a base schedule, which creates substantially more liability in the real-time model under the Assistance Energy design that was put forward. Now, on the other side, we heard support for the design and the in-market Assistance Energy design, but then opposition of continuing to allow the existing failure consequences of having your transfers frozen as an option remaining. On top of all of this, the MSC then raised a series of concerns about this design really being targeted towards stress system conditions, but not having a lot of granularity on when it can be turned on and off. And that could create the potential for spurious failures during non-stress conditions to have very, very large pricing impacts to the extent that a BAA failed during non-stressed conditions, and then all of their real-time imbalance energy was set at the $1,000 or $2,000 transfer cost. So we took all this feedback and we realized that it doesn't seem like the previously proposed Assistance Energy design had broad support, and ultimately what we want to put forward is something that has broad support from the stakeholder community. So we went back and we tried to think within the bounds of a June 1, 2023 implementation, what design can we put forward that sends a correct price signal for Assistance Energy transfers, but at the same time doesn't send such a large price signal that a lot of balancing authority areas, due to that asymmetry, would opt to not utilize its functionality. again, we want functionality that balancing authority areas would plan to use. So with all that said, we have a new proposal that we've come up with. Can we go to the next slide? And I'm going to kind of walk through at a high level what it is and then go through a couple of examples of how we think this would work. And obviously, this is the first time you're seeing this, so I more than welcome any questions that you may have or comments on this proposal. So we would look to implement an ex post penalty rather than an in-the-market penalty for assistance energy transfers. This would still be optional. The reasons that it would still be optional, I think, will be highlighted by the examples. There is a limited accuracy which we'll be able to get with a out-of-market charge or surcharge for assistance energy transfers. And due to that, we think that it should be under the discretion of each WEIM BAA whether they choose to utilize this functionality or opt into the existing consequences for failure of the RSC. So the way we view this working is it would be a ex post price of either $1,000 or $2,000, so depending upon the prevailing bid cap, that is applied to EIM transfers following a failure of the RSC. Now, with an ex post price, if it's just applied to EIM transfers, you run the risk of a BAA failing the RSC and then still having significant amounts of economic displacement occurring into their balancing authority areas, since the ex post price won't be known when those transfers are cleared. So the second bullet is an attempt to try to bound the amount of economic displacement transfers that could be exposed to this surcharge. So what we would look to do is we would apply the ex post surcharge to the minimum of the failure quantity of the RSC. So this is either the amount that the capacity or the flexible ramping sufficiency test was failed by, or the dynamic EIM transfers that eventually get tagged. A simple way to think about this is roughly what RTD would dispatch. So if we do this at a minimum, it ensures that economic displacement transfers aren't exposed to this large penalty. It also tries to cover for the fact that BAAs have real-time tools that can reduce the load in their balancing authority areas in very tight system conditions. And to the extent that occurs, we try to recognize that and limit the exposure to the ex post surcharge. Now, this is an interim proposal. We don't view this as the final assistance energy design. I think long-term wise, we would want to get a penalty or a surcharge that is more in the market, but can be applied more symmetrically between the California ISO BAA and WEIM BAAs. Part of this is having the price formation enhancements completed. One of the other concerns that we received on the final proposal is that the assistance energy design did change the pricing limitations, and really that was kind of a quick form of scarcity pricing. We recognize that concern, and the existing price formation initiative, we believe, is a good place to have that discussion and then potentially design either assistance energy transfers in that initiative or use the results of that initiative to inform the eventual assistance energy transfer design. I also wanted to note that this isn't detailed in the final proposal, but we would look to charge for assistance energy per the OAT. For the California ISO BAA, we would propose it is to be charged to measured demand. This is just something I wanted to highlight that is an additional change that is identified in the final proposal. Can we go to the, oh, I do see a question.
We do have a question from Michelle Keto from the CPUC. Let's go ahead and get your line unmuted.
Hey, Danny, this is Michelle. So many questions.
Hi, Michelle.
Hey, so first of all, when you say the minimum of the quantity of the failure or the WEIM transfers, so let's say you failed by 10 megawatts, but the dynamic transfers in the very last 5-minute market are 1,000. Are you saying that it would be applied to the 10 megawatts? I just want to clarify.
Yes, and we have a series of examples that kind of walk through how the min function would be applied.
Okay. And then I just want to clarify, which failure are you talking about? Are you talking about only the final binding failure?
Yes, this would only be to the final binding failure. If a BIA opts in, essentially their EIM transfers would just be unbound. So a failure wouldn't affect the RTPD dispatch.
Okay. And then when you say it's charged to measured demand, does that include exports?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, that's it for right now. Thank you so much.
Sure. Okay, seeing no other questions, I wanted to walk through the examples, and then I think we'll pause again and have another opportunity for questions. So can we go to the next slide? All right, so this is the most simple example, and all of these are simplified. Don't consider the ETSR between the BAs ever binding. Just trying to highlight how the ex post surcharge would be applied. So in this example, BAA1 has 900 megawatts of supply, and they have 1,000 megawatts of demand, so they would fail the RSC by 100 megawatts. In this case, there's no economic displacement occurring. The 1,000 megawatts of demand that was tested for in the RSC comes in at 1,000 megawatts, resulting in 100 megawatts of dynamic EIM transfers into BAA1, which has failed the RSC. So the ex post surcharge would be applied to that 100 megawatt quantity. This is the simplest and easiest example. So I think we can move to the next example where the min function starts to make a difference. So in this example, I think this is what you were getting at, Michelle. What happens if economic displacement occurs due to just prevailing market prices? So in this example, you have that same 900 megawatts of supply and 1,000 megawatts of demand in BAA1. So they're still failing the RSC by 100 megawatts. However, the external supply in BAA2 is cheaper than the most expensive supply in BAA1, resulting in 25 megawatts of economic displacement, so that generators ramp down to 375 megawatts rather than 400 megawatts. We would actually see 125 megawatts of dynamic EIM transfers, 25 of those being economic displacement. So using that min function, the ex post surcharge would just be applied to the 100 megawatt failure amount. So the surcharge is, again, 100 megawatts times that $1,000 price. Any questions? I see a question.
Hey, Danny, this is Michelle. I just wanted to go to that min function again. So
Yeah.
you could still have inadvertent failures that would result in a penalty, right? Because it's the minimum of. So you could have full economic displacement, but because you failed it, you'd still have to pay the penalty for the failure. Is that right?
I don't follow. I mean, if a BAA fails and we have the accuracy of the test right, then they don't have sufficient capacity or flexibility, and then that would set the upper bound of their cost exposure.
Oh, I guess I was thinking that because some people ride close to the line in terms of what they show, that they could inadvertently fail. But maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I thought there were lots of
No.
failures.
Okay, that's a more nuanced question. I do think that that dynamic occurs. As you're aware, the California ISO BAA, due to its real-time move, participates in the EIM typically in a more robust way than some of the other EIM BAAs. And then based on particularly MSG transitions and what the market's doing, that does present a challenge for some BAAs failing. We do have some mitigative measures which we think helps to address small failures that may not be true instances of insufficiency, but I'll save that till we get to that slide.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Sure.
As a reminder, please press the raised hand icon on your screen to enter the question queue. You will hear a beep tone when your line is unmuted. At that time, please then state your name and question. For those on the phone-only line, pressing #2 will put you in the question queue. We have one question. Caller, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hey, Danny, this is Libby Kirby from Bonneville.
Hey, Libby.
Hey, I have two questions. First is, so in an example, and maybe you have more examples, I don't know, but I'll ask it and feel free to say it's on the next slide. In an example where you fail by, say, 1 megawatt, but you get a bunch of transfers not due to economic displacement, but due to, high load, low wind, whatever, you could fail by 1, get 125 megawatts in, and you pay for the 1. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, that is one of the inaccuracies. Is the RSE at T40 is a snapshot, so conditions can either get better or worse. And in our thought, at least, we would think they would tend to get better due to the real-time operator actions that they're able to take regarding like load modification or emergency supply that isn't captured in the test, rather than get worse.
Okay. And presumably part of that points to the fact that, like, well, no one's expected to have more than the test. So if you end up in a tail event, okay, fair. That's, I assume, one of those things we would deal with. Like you said, this is an interim potentially. Second question, ABC would not be considered in this case, right? You could fail by a bunch of megawatts, say, if you had been able to use your ABC, well, you would be able to use your ABC prior to hitting a power balance constraint, but if you fail by a bunch, even if you never hit power balance, even if, well, I suppose if you have transfers, it could be this case where you fail by 100, there's economic displacement, but technically you would have been able to prevent yourself from having a problem. You would still pay that 100,000.
Okay, well, you beat me to the punch. I think Michelle was kind of getting at this too. But I think the mitigative measure that we're proposing with this is to apply a credit for the ABC that each BAA has. Not having the pricing wheel on the market, you obviously can't force its dispatch and utilization, but it didn't seem reasonable enough or reasonable to us to apply a surcharge when a BAA may have ABC set aside to address that they would plan to use if they didn't have supply or flexibility.
Okay, sorry to steal your thunder. I'll hand it back.
No.
Thank you.
It's just, yeah, it's that's the hope. And I guess expanding on that point while we're talking about it is one of the concerns that the MSC raised was the failures during kind of non-stressed conditions. And that to us seemed like kind of a rough tool that a BAA could utilize to protect themselves from the surcharge due to failures in non-stressed systems conditions, just due to kind of the way the market results work in the flex ramp test. They could have ABC set aside. If we all reasonably agree that is something that we should credit them towards because they would have used it if they actually needed it, then we would offer it as a credit.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So this example highlights the potential for improving conditions and how that min function would work. So in this example, it's the same setup. You have 900 megawatts of supply in BAA1, 1,000 megawatts of demand in BAA1. So they're going to fail the RSC by 100 megawatts. However, when you actually get to the market interval, maybe load did not materialize, or maybe a emergency demand response program was activated, or a phone message went out, which reduced demand and the actual need for assistance energy type EIM transfers, and only 950 megawatts of supply or of demand materialized. In that case, assuming no economic displacement, there'd only be a 50 megawatt dynamic EIM transfer into BAA1. The min function would then just apply that ex post surcharge to the 50 megawatt transfer. Can we go to the next slide? Oh, no, I see a question from Michelle.
Hey, Danny, though this
Yes.
never really happens to the CAISO balancing authority, right? Because our failures are always much smaller than the WEIM transfers, in part because we're supporting the exports, right? So I just have never seen it that the WEIM transfers, which are like 1,000 or 1,500, would be smaller than the failure. I'm just
So 2 points. First, I think that's a correct observation, Michelle. I think that goes back to the LPTs always being counted on the CAISO's obligation in the current implementation of the RSE. That's, in my view, almost the other half of this proposal is correcting that and having the CAISO tested on its forecast demand and firm exports rather than those LPTs. So I would expect that to be reduced going forward when this goes in. The other thing I'd like to point out is that if you go to the September heat events reports that the CAISO put out, there were instances where the RSE both undercounted certain supply types and overcounted certain supply types. And I think specifically how DR would participate wasn't always captured at the time of the test. And this is just due to the nature of the test being between 40 and 100 minutes prior to the operating condition. So today, you're right, we don't see this dynamic for the CAISO BAA going forward. I don't know if it is impossible that we would see it, but also this proposal is for all EIM BAAs. So I think since they don't have LPTs, they may be able to see this type of dynamic right now.
okay. And then I just wanted to follow up on your other point. The September events, when they were doing the RSEs, didn't exclude the LPT exports, right? So have you guys done the counterfactual on that to see what we would have done if we'd excluded the LPTs?
I can't speak for Guillermo. I don't think it's explicit in the report, but if that's a request, he may have that information handy already, or we may be able to pull it, but I don't know offhand.
Okay, and then
I do know that there was significant volumes of LPT exports, though.
Yeah, and real-time wheels. Okay, so also I wanted to touch base with you on the RDRR. So are you saying that the RDRR was not included the RSE from the September events?
If I'm recalling the report right, I believe it was included, not all intervals, but a number of intervals. It was part of the DR that was included as a supply for the CAISO.
Okay, I mean, because that's one of the things that we said. I mean, really, in all EEA 2s and 3s, it should be counted in the RSE. But I'll raise those points on the summer assessment report. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, can we go to the next slide? No, back one slide. I got my examples mixed up. Okay, so this is the kind of inaccuracy that is inherent to this ex post design that I want to make every participant aware of, because ultimately this is why we think each BAA needs to evaluate if this functionality is right for them or not. So in this example, again, BAA1, 900 megawatts of supply, 1,000 megawatts of load. BAA2, again, has excess supply. Now, the load comes in better than was seen in the RSE test. So 950 megawatts of demand materializes rather than the full 1,000 megawatts. However, due to the prices, economic displacement does occur, and BAA1 does get EIM transfers that are purely economic in nature. So there'd be 20 out of that 75 megawatt transfer, there would be 25 megawatts of economic displacement transfer, displacing that $200 resource in BA1, as well as 50 megawatts of transfers that were needed to cure the insufficiency. Here, the min function would expose the BAA1 to a surcharge based off that 75 megawatts of transfers. And this isn't an accuracy of the design. This is just where we are with what we think we can implement by next summer. But I do want to make every BAA aware that this is a trade-off that you'll need to work through as you evaluate if this functionality is right for your organization. And I'd like to see if we have any questions.
I don't see any questions in the queue.
Okay. Let's go to the next slide then. So in summary, not modeling the consequences in the market does have the potential to lead to an inaccurate application of the surcharge. This ultimately is one of the reasons for our original design of putting this in the market is you avoid this type of inaccuracy. It's when it's in the market, the price formation is more accurate and it's better. But it's inaccurate, which is why we think it's appropriate for each BAA to decide if this functionality is right for them. We would also provide optionality on if a WEIM BAA would like their ABC to be considered as a credit to reduce the volume of transfers that are exposed to the surcharge. Again, if this was an in-the-market surcharge, ABC would be utilized, and so to us, that part of the previous proposal wasn't unreasonable, so we think extending that same type of functionality here makes a lot of sense. And this does serve to allow a BAA to control their exposure to this type of surcharge during non-stressed conditions to the extent that they somewhat spuriously fail the capacity or more likely the flexible ramp sufficiency test. I see a question.
Go ahead, Alan. Your line's unmuted.
Hi, Alan Mack, FTG&E. This jogged my memory of a question I've been meaning to ask on this functionality. Let's say that a BAA did not opt out, and so if you, or it does not opt in, and a neighboring BAA does, would your units still be used to potentially displace or serve as assistance energy, and then would you get the transfer revenues from that? Or do both have to opt in order to participate in this program?
So the opting in and out is on the receiving the transfer side. The EIM will continue to use all bids that are voluntarily made available to it. And then the revenue allocation will be as described in the proposal. That's not changing. So it's pro rata to net exporting WEIM BAAs. The transfer revenue concept is in EDAM, and I think it'll arrive in EDAM, but it's not present right now in the WEIM.
Okay. Thank you. Sure.
And I think the other thing that you highlighted there was important, and I do want to reiterate that the existing failure consequences, I think, while we all recognize they need to change the ability to limit transfers at the last pass interval, the way to do that would be to safely ramp to zero and not cause reliability problems, which is outside of the scope of this initiative. Given the inaccuracy of the ex post surcharge, though, we don't think that we can force somebody into a potentially inaccurate surcharge if they don't believe it's in their organization's best interest. So we do propose to keep the existing failure consequences in place as well as an option. I see we have a couple more questions.
Yeah, let's go ahead with Libby Kirby first. Go ahead, Libby.
Hi, Libby from BPA. Can you go back to the last example, Danny?
Yes. Can we go back one slide? Okay.
Hasn't shown up on my side yet, but can you contrast this with how this would have worked under the original proposal? Would it have turned out the same, that you would have paid? I think, if I'm remembering, it's 9:30 on a Monday, so bear with me. I think if you hit the power balance constraint in this case, then all imbalance would have been charged the 1,000 megawatts. In this case, it looks like, well, I guess in the examples, we don't have base schedules, so we don't really know what is imbalanced.
Yeah, so there's a couple differences. Under the in-market design that we had previously proposed, those dynamic EIM transfers would be priced at $1,150 because there'd be a $1,000 cost adder to them. That would ensure the dispatch of that $200 resource in BAA1 before clearing those additional transfers. The other difference that you're highlighting is here only the transfer quantity has a surcharge applied to it, whereas before that $1,150 price would have acted as the marginal resource for all real-time imbalance energy for BAA1.
But in that case, that does take care of the issue with like economic displacement versus transfer secure insufficiency, right? There's no way to get it on economic displacement. Okay. I think I'm there. And same thing, we talked about the ABC also, like that would have come first. So you would have dispatched all of your ABC, you would have then hit a power balance constraint, and then anything above that. And I think there's been discussion about applying the price. I know I saw some MSC discussion of applying the price to everything above power balance versus all of the imbalance, but that's where both the ABC and the like economic displacement issues were separate. Like they weren't an issue in the original.
There are appealing aspects of the in-market design because it does ensure that the right sequence of dispatch happens, but it again, it just does so kind of in an asymmetric way.
Yeah, it's totally fair, totally fair. I just wanted to make sure I understood the differences, the sort of trade-offs. Okay, thank you.
And then the one other kind of nuanced clarification for the record is ABC would most likely be dispatched, but it does somewhat depend upon the external marginal resource cost as compared to the penalty price in the scheduling run for when ABC would be triggered. But for the most part, it should be utilized.
Okay. I assume that's one of the things when we get back to this that we would like try and make the prices work such that the ABC would generally, nearly always be dispatched first.
Yeah, and that could require changes to ABC just within the entire set of priorities in the scheduling run, but I think we're all recognizing that may be a conversation that's better for price formation enhancements.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
We do have Jenny Mestry. Your line's unmuted. Jenny, go ahead.
Jenny, can you hear us?
Yeah. She doesn't, I don't think she hears us. We can go back to her. I'll send her a chat, Danny.
Okay. Well, I think that concludes the material that we had. It's a fairly simple design, right? It's just an ex post surcharge with the min function to try to limit the amount of economic displacement that the surcharge is applied to. But this is something that we feel we likely will be able to get in place prior to next summer, which again is a design consideration in the scope of what's possible to have an interim solution by next summer.
We do have a caller on the phone lines with a question.
Sure.
Caller ending in 3566. Your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, Danny. It's Lindsay Schluckway from NV Energy. I just had a couple quick questions on your proposal. So the base schedules that the net scheduled interchange that a BA has base scheduled, this would not apply to, correct? There would be no penalty price on those. This would just be the
Yeah,
EIM dynamic.
Yes, it's the dynamic interchange.
Okay. And I also just want to clarify. So it's on all EIM dynamic transfers for the interval that you failed?
It would be either that failure quantity or what gets tagged for each of the 5-minute increments within that 15-minute interval that's failed.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Sure. I think I saw that Jenny may be available again. If we can try to go back to her.
Yes. Let's go ahead. Jenny, can you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, thanks, Danny.
Good morning.
Good morning. So my question is, there's no documentation, so I don't know. So this is still an energy assistant proposal where you have to opt in or opt out from the master file notification. Is
Yes.
that correct? Okay. So
Yes, that's correct.
So the EIM entities that do not opt in with this energy assistant proposal, the consequences of failure remains the same?
Yes, the status quo consequences would extend during this interim period.
Okay. Wow. All right. Thanks for that clarification.
Sure. I see another question from Libby.
Your line is unmuted, Libby.
Hey, I think my hand was still up. I actually have a question. Well, good call. Thanks for calling on me. It just popped in my head. I think Michelle brought up a little while ago something about DR and whether or not it counts towards RSE. Has that already been decided, or was that something else we were going to deal with going forward?
So phase 1 allowed, well, take a step back. PDR, the CAISO resource model will count. RDRR, another CAISO emergency type DR resource model will count if the bids are enabled into the market. And I think that's what Michelle was getting at. There are some operational challenges about when those bids get released to the market due to the limited runtime of those resources. From the CAISO BA system operator standpoint, you might start to get really tight at 2 in the afternoon, but you might not want to release a 4-hour duration resource into the market for dispatch at 2 in the afternoon and have the demand come back at 6 or 7. So I think that's kind of along the lines of her question. Just more generally, in phase 1, we allowed each EIM BAA to make modifications to their obligations that reflect DR in the market to try to capture their potential use of DR in the RSC.
Okay, and in the case of the CAISO one, like the emergency DR, you're saying it would only count towards RSC when it has a bid associated with it.
Well, so CAISO has a bunch of different emergency DRs.
Sorry,
so we have the Sufficiency's, the RDRR program. That only counts when the RSC sees a valid bid, which occurs after the CAISO BA system operators have enabled it into the market.
And that's the one where you only enable it if you're already in a EEA 2 or 3?
Yeah, I think that it's considered a load modification program, which coincides with the definition of an EEA 2. We can enable them. Well, okay, so let's take a step back. I don't want to spread misinformation. The CAISO can enable it during any type of warning, even warning EEA 1, 2, or 3. I think when it gets utilized, it then becomes an EEA 2 upon dispatch because a load modification program has been used.
Okay, so it's like you're automatically in an EEA 2 because you did the thing that means you're in an EEA 2. Okay.
Not because it's enabled, but because it gets dispatched. Yeah.
Because it gets dispatched, yes. That one has always eluded me slightly because in my head, it shouldn't count for RS if it's not bid into the market, right? Like ABC doesn't count towards meeting RS, and that in my head was similar. But yes, if if it's enabled and it is associated with a bid, and if the market decides to deploy it, can it be deployed for any reason, right? Like if the bid price is right, it could send it somewhere else.
So the control is that the CAISO system operators, we're in an emergency and they don't think it's going to cause any like downside risks about when it comes back. When it gets deployed, it'll be deployed whenever its bid price is met. Its bid price is $950 as a minimum.
Yeah.
So it
it's
could
guaranteed
be
to be
sent out, but
it's incredibly rare, but it's at least it's just like if anyone else put in a very high priced resource but bid it in to meet RS. So that seems fair. That one, okay, yes. That helps. I realize it's not specific to this particular piece of the proposal, but that's always sort of eluded me why that counted towards RS, and that makes sense. If they make a decision, it then is associated with the bid price, just like anything else would be. It could be deployed for any reason. Obviously, you set the bid price in such a way that it's not going to be deployed for any old reason, but it is in there. It's not comparable to ABC at that point. Okay, cool. Thank you. I'm clear.
We're on the same page. Sure.
We have a caller on the phone only line. Caller ending in 3566. Your line is unmuted.
Hi, sorry, it's Lindsay Schleckway again with NV Energy. I just had another quick question. In the paper, do you have the equation of will work?
I didn't catch the middle part of that, Lindsay.
Oh, that's okay. In the paper, do you have the equation of how the minimum function will operate?
I think it's just described in text that it's the min of the failure quantity of the capacity or flex ramp test in the upwards direction as compared to the tagged dynamic transfers.
Okay. I think where I'm struggling is when you would pay the transfers over the just the failed amount. In what situations, and partly I'm having some technical difficulties, so I can't see your slides, but that's the piece that I'm struggling with. So that's why I was wondering if there was an equation or something.
Well, I mean, it's just a min. The operational scenario that we thought it would be like NVE is load is 4,000 megawatts and there are 3,900 megawatts of supply, but your governor decides to send out a text message with an Amber Alert sound so everybody reduces their load because it's an emergency and your load comes in at 3,950 megawatts. And so just the 50 megawatts of transfers would be exposed rather than the full 100 megawatts of transfers or the 100 megawatts that the RS test saw as a deficiency.
Ah, okay. All right, that's helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
We have a chat question. Could you review how the revenues from the surcharge would be allocated in this approach?
Sure. So that actually isn't changing from the previous proposal. It's pro rata to net EIM exporters. And the thought here is those are likely the parties that are bringing excess capacity into the EIM, which are supporting curing through assistance energy transfers.
There are no further questions at this time.
Okay, well, before we move on, I did want to remind everybody this is about half of the proposal for RSEE Phase 2. The other half is trying to correct for the way LPTs are counted in the CAISO BA's obligation, as well as some rules changes around how LPTs are tagged, which we think offers better situational awareness for both the California ISO BA as well as any of our neighboring BAA partners. So this is half the proposal. We, as Brenda mentioned earlier, are still looking to go to the December joint governance meeting for approval of this proposal. The goal of that December governance meeting is to start developing this functionality to have something in place that corrects for that LPT issue, but then through assistance energy transfers potentially can increase reliability during the summer of 2023. So I think I can turn it back over to you, Brenda. And you should see this presentation in the paper sometime later this afternoon.
We did get a question in the chat, Danny, from Matt Connolly. I'm not sure where he's from, but he asked, can you clarify whether the CAISO BAA would be opt-in or opt-out of assistance energy upon implementation? Matt Connolly, can you confirm where you're from as well?
I'm Matt from PG&E, so I can help with both questions. My leaning would be that the CAISO BAA would opt in to this functionality. It doesn't have that same asymmetric concern that the in-market assistance energy transfers have, but we are having a comment period with this revised final proposal, so I would encourage all members of the California ISO BAA, so all LSEs or market participants, to please, through your comments, indicate how you would feel about the CAISO BAA opting in. Oh, I see one more question.
Let's go, Michelle Keto from CPUC. Your line's unmuted.
One question, one comment. So would this go live on June 1st, or would it go in earlier so we can see how it works?
My guess it would go live on June 1st. I think that through the market sim process, when CAISO rolls out new functionality, we would have a chance to test how it works.
Okay, and then I would imagine when you file this, it's going to be severable. So obviously, if we don't get the LPT portion of this, we would not support the emergency assistance program. So just, so I'm just trying to explain that there could be contingent comments on this.
The severability in this actually is on the tagging rule changes, but we would view kind of the assistance energy and LPT components as companion policy items.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Sure. And I see another question from Todd as well.
Hey, Danny, this is Todd Ryan from PG&E. I have a question about the allocation of transfer revenues or the penalty revenues. You said it's based on net exporting. Is that relative to the base schedule? So, for example, the balancing area is day ahead coming in as a -6 net importer. If they then in EIM export or increase or decrease their imports to allow additional exports, so they're now a -2. So they, from the EIM perspective, they're exporting 4, or is it from a net schedule interchange perspective?
My understanding is that it would be the dynamic EIM transfers. But James, can you weigh in on the settlement allocation? He may be double booked on another call, so I'll touch base with him and we will make sure to be explicit about that in the publication of the revised final proposal this afternoon, Todd.
Yeah, I just think that it makes more sense to be based on, relative only to the EIM transfers, not to any day-ahead schedules that have previously been secured.
Yeah, I'm on the same page. I just want to confirm that our settlements guru doesn't have something else in mind.
Great. Thank you so much for your help.
Sure. Okay, Brenda, I think we can turn it over to you for next steps.
Great, will do. So for next steps, we would like to share that the EIN classification for this is that we're proposing joint authority for all elements of the proposal with exception of the changes to the lower priority export tagging rules. The proposed LPT tagging would change the rules about how to tag exports from the CAISO Balancing Authority area, and we are not applicable for the WEIM participants in their capacity as WEIM participants. The CAISO views the proposed changes to the tagging rules as severable for the remainder of the proposal. Are there any questions for this slide? No questions, thank you. So let's go to the next slide. The proposed schedule was mentioned earlier. We plan to do a comment deadline of November 15th for the revised final proposal. We are aware of the other deadlines of other initiatives happening that week, but due to other decisional items, we definitely have to have this comment deadline at this time. But feel free to reach out to us if there's any questions, but please submit them at this time. And I do see a question from Nadia. Will there be a comment template for this initiative? Yes, that will be posted today as well. And that will be due on the 15th. So please keep that deadline in mind because it is very, it's coming close. And then Michelle Keto from CPUC, go ahead. Your line's unmuted for your question.
Hey, just one last question. Will you be posting both your presentation and the revised paper today?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Michelle, for your question. Yes, they'll be posted as well. We do have that decisional, the joint governance meeting on December 15th coming close as well. And then also the implementation of June 1st, 2023. All right, sounds great. So I'm going to go ahead and bring back Danny for any questions after, this slide lastly. This is just the link, and we will have this posted as well. It'll direct you to the EIM Resource Efficiency Evaluation Enhancements, where you'll find all three pieces, the proposal, the slides, and the commenting tool link. And that will be posted there. But let me go ahead and bring back Danny to end our call.
Yeah, I just wanted to take an opportunity to thank everyone for kind of bearing with us on this slightly non-traditional process. We are trying to be responsive to the guidance we received from the governing body and the CAISO board and try to have a reliability improvement in place by next summer. So thank you for bearing with us as we've striven to meet that goal. So thank you, and I look forward to your comments.
Great, so we can go ahead and close this call. Sharon, my event producer, please close this call for us today. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.